Hello, folks. It is 1 o'clock, and I see some of you starting to populate the session from the waiting room. Really happy you're joining us this afternoon. It is a beautiful Friday, so I know that you may be taking time from being outside and enjoying the weather, but we're going to have a really engaging webinar, and I'm looking forward to being able to present this opportunity with you this afternoon. We are going to get underway in just a moment, so thanks for signing on. Hello, folks. It is 1 o'clock, and I want to get underway on time. I know we have a really packed session we're going to be featuring today. Thank you for joining us for MS4 Permit Update presented by CDRPC and our presenting sponsor, Barton & Judas. I see people are starting to join us from the waiting room, so welcome to those of you who have joined us for this exciting session this afternoon. My name is Martin Daly. I'm the Director of Water Quality Programs for CDRPC. I'm also the MC for the session this afternoon, but this session, because it deals with the MS4 permit and its update, is right in my wheelhouse. So I'm really looking forward to leaning in and learning more about these permit updates. Before I get to our speaker, I do want to do a little bit of what I consider perhaps a shameless plug. CDRPC is a regional planning commission. We serve Schenectady, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Albany counties in a variety of capacities when it comes to projects and programs that extend beyond municipal borders, such as economic development, youth justice, water quality, and sustainability initiatives. We do have an open opportunity to apply for a program we call our Technical Assistance Program. We partner with called our sister agency, Capital District Transportation Committee, and really work on land use and transportation initiatives that are dialed into a particular corridor in a community to be able to help them increase perhaps the efficiency of that corridor or reimagine the way that corridor functions in a transportation way and deliver services to residents and businesses along that transportation corridor. So I recommend folks, if you are in the 4-county region and you want to check out this program, please do so. We'll be happy to look over an application if you're interested in that program. For today's session, people that are joining us do join with their video and sound off for security purposes, but we encourage you to engage with us as the session unfolds, ask questions by using that Q&A function or the chat function. Send us a message, send us a question. I will relay that to David as we go through the session, and we'll be able to get to those. We are live streaming our session on YouTube, and what that means is this will automatically be uploaded to our Eventbrite page at the end of the session, so you'll be able to go back and see the presentation. So if you miss something, if you want some more information about a particular item in the agenda, don't worry, we are archiving the presentation and saving the video. For those of you with questions about the confirmation of attendance, municipalities have a wide latitude of what they accept for confirmation of attendance in planning and zoning trainings. This session will be 1 hour, and exactly 24 hours after the conclusion of our session, each person that registered via an email will receive an email confirming their attendance in the webinar. If you don't get that, reach out to us at CDRPC, and we can certainly confirm your attendance and then furnish you with the document that confirms your attendance. So with all of the ado out of the way, today we're here to talk about the New York State DEC Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Nobody refers to it in that way. We call them MS4. The MS4 permit has not been updated since 2015, and substantial changes have been made to the permit over 10 years. The current draft permit has been a draft for quite some time, but it does contain several modifications and reporting requirements that are really going to require communities to up their stormwater management programs. Our presentation today is going to highlight proposed permit changes and impacts they'll likely have on municipal operations. Those of you who are joining us who are within a municipality that has obtained permit coverage, you may be aware of some of these permit requirements. There may be municipalities out there which are anticipating obtaining permit coverage, and so this will be a critical look inside the permit, its program and reporting requirements that are really going to ramp up the administration of stormwater management programs on the municipal level. So David, I want to welcome you to joining us today. Your microphone and camera off. I just want to let you know, in case you were ready to jump out of the gate and present to us. So really looking forward to the presentation today. And David is flying solo today. Nadine was not able to join us, but David, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we appreciate Barton & Judas for being not only a speaker, but also a presenting sponsor as well.
Thanks, Martin. I got a pop-up that my video was stopped. I can't start it. So
I can, let's see, I can work that out. There you go.
All right.
Awesome.
Great. Well, hello, everybody, and happy Friday. Going to share my screen here. Get back to the beginning. All right, Martin, I trust everyone can see that. You can
It
see
looks
that?
beautiful. I've got
Okay.
your standard outfall picture flowing and we're good to go.
Yeah, and that's what we like to see. Nice clean water coming out of that outfall. So as Martin mentioned, I'm Dave Haney with Barton and LaJudas. Nadine Medina was going to be joining me today to co-present. I know she's worked with many municipalities in the Capital District on their MS4 stormwater program. Unfortunately, she has COVID. She's doing well, but she can't speak. So I am running solo. All right. So just I like to give a little bit of background before we get into the permit changes. And, first and foremost, why does all of this stormwater MS4 regulations, why do they matter? What do they mean to all of us? And the regulations are really driven by the Clean Water Act through the federal government. And the purpose of the regulations, whether it's the MS4 stormwater regulations, construction speedies regulations, or industrial stormwater regulations, is to try to protect, restore, and maintain our surface waters. We all want clean waters, rivers, lakes, streams to recreate in, to swim in. We use many of these resources for water supplies. So it's critically important to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our waters clean, not only for us, but for future generations as well. So why do we manage stormwater? Not just because of that intro that we all want clean water, but of course there is a regulatory requirement to do so. So we've been living with this MS4 stormwater permit for several years. Many municipalities, based on your population density, population size, are required to have an MS4 stormwater permit. There has been a pretty significant amount of enforcement over the years. And if municipalities aren't in compliance, there's pretty hefty fines that go along with that. So it's in everyone's best interest to maintain compliance with your stormwater permit. So stormwater, as I mentioned, it's a critical resource to protect our water bodies. And latest federal EPA surveys have indicated that over half of our nation's waters are impacted by stormwater. So these regulations, again, they really try to restore our water bodies and make sure that they're protected. Some of the biggest pollutants that run off our municipal lands, impervious areas, are sediment. So that could be basically dirt coming off any open disturbed areas. A lot of times construction sites where there's land grading operations can have a pretty significant sediment load to our water bodies. But in addition to sediment with our MS4s, there's oils and greases that can be running off our streets, herbicides, pesticides, nutrients that can be running off any mowed surfaces, any grass surfaces. So we need to be careful of the amount of herbicides, pesticides, and nutrients, fertilizers that we're putting down on our lawns. So, a lot of people put fertilizers on their lawns to help them grow. But if not properly done, those fertilizers can run off into the stormwater and make algae blooms, harmful algae blooms, and degrade our water bodies. There's also potential impacts with detergents. So if you think about outdoor car washing and chlorine as well. So dewatering swimming pools, again, things that we don't necessarily want in our stormwater. And of course, bacteria. So we've all seen the pick up the pet waste signs. Bacteria from pet waste and other sources can be a significant impact to stormwater. So what I'm going to do over the course of the next 45 minutes or so is to give an overview of the MS4 permit and really focus on what's required today and how that's going to change once the draft MS4 permit is adopted. So we'll go over some of the current requirements and some of the new requirements that are going to affect our MS4 stormwater programs. And as we go on throughout, as Martin mentioned, feel free to type in a question in the chat box or the Q&A box, and Martin will prompt me and we'll take care of questions just as they come up. All right, so just a little bit of an overview. Martin said municipal separate storm sewer system, MS4. That's the last time I'm going to say municipal separate storm sewer system. So what is it? It's basically any collection that's publicly owned by a municipality that collects and conveys stormwater. So you can see here in the yellow outline, it can be a closed drainage system. So it could be catch basins in a road that lead to drainage pipes. It can also be open channel, so roadside ditches that collect, move stormwater, and discharge them to a receiving water body. So that could be a lake, could be a river, a creek, a wetland, any regulated water body. So a couple of things that are not part of the MS4 are sanitary sewer systems. So discharges from sanitary sewers. Combined sewers are not part of the MS4. So combined sewer is a sewer collection system that takes both stormwater and sanitary waste. And during high rainfall events, those combined sewers can overflow, leading to direct discharges of sanitary waste. So the MS4 program does not cover those. It also does not cover wastewater treatment plants. So discharges from our POTWs, our publicly owned treatment works facilities, are not covered under the MS4 program. They're covered under a separate individual SPEEDIES program. So again, it's really just the collection system from municipalities that drain surface water runoff to our receiving water bodies. And as you can see in this picture, there's a lot of potential pollutants, anything from erosion along stream banks, vehicle maintenance activities, construction site operations, lawn care, fertilizers, pesticides, all these things can be collected in the MS4's drainage system and discharged to our water bodies. So the MS4 permit covers urbanized areas throughout New York State. You can see the purple areas that it covers. So these are all the MS4 areas in New York State. There is one more in Watertown. This map wasn't updated yet by the DEC, but there is another urbanized area in Watertown. So all told, there are 544 regulated MS4s as of last count. They can be at the state level, county level, local level, city, towns, villages, institutions, agencies, for example, Thruway Authority or New York State Department of Transportation, that they can be regulated MS4s as well. So focusing in on the Capital District, it covers cities, towns, villages, and the counties within Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady. So if you have any questions whether or not you are regulated MS4, you can certainly reach out to myself or Martin, and we can confirm if the regulations apply to your municipality. So the real focus of this MS4 stormwater program is to develop a municipal stormwater management plan or municipal stormwater management program. And there's 6 key minimum control measures that go into the MS4 plan. So they include public education and outreach. So municipalities need to engage the public, educate them on the impacts of stormwater. They involve public involvement and participation. So under this control measure, we're looking to make opportunities for the public to get involved with the local stormwater program. So every year, MS4s have to submit reports to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, documenting everything they've done in the past year for their stormwater program. Those reports need to be made available for public review, comment, participation. We also look to get the public involved with volunteer activities, anything from a stream cleanup to an Earth Day event. Just again, trying to get the public engaged and trying to be part of the process. The third minimum control measure is illicit discharge detection and elimination. What that means is all the stormwater from whether it's a pipe or a ditch ultimately will lead to an outfall. And the outfall is the location where the stormwater discharges into a receiving water body. So part of the MS4 program is reviewing these outfalls, inspecting these outfalls to make sure that it's only stormwater that's draining to them. So an illicit discharge could be anything from illegal dumping down a storm drain. It could be a cross connection from a sanitary sewer to a storm sewer. It could be a floor drain from a vehicle maintenance shop that goes to the storm sewer system. Those are all illicit discharges. And there's a program and a requirement to inspect, identify, and eliminate those. The fourth control measure deals with construction site stormwater runoff control. Again, this is really important because as we're doing any earthwork operations, any land grading, there's a big potential to get sediment, silt running off construction sites and into our water bodies. So there's a big focus on construction site stormwater management. The fifth control measure is post-construction stormwater management. So after we have a new development or new construction, typically there's permanent stormwater practices that go in place. These could be your stormwater ponds, a created stormwater wetland, could be green infrastructure practices like rain gardens or bioretention areas. So these are required to be documented in the municipality's program and inspected. And the final minimum control measure is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. Just making sure that all of the activities at municipal facilities aren't contributing to potential pollutants to the stormwater system. So making sure that municipal highway garages, parks departments, making sure that they have programs and policies in place so they're not negatively affecting stormwater runoff. So it's just an overview, as Martin said in the introduction. It's been a while since we've had substantial revisions to the MS4 permit. It's been over 10 years. So we had a permit in 2010 that was challenged by environmental groups. There's been several litigations. It's been tied up in the courts for many years. And then in 2015, we got the last MS4 permit that came out, and that's the permit that we're still adhering to today. There was a draft permit that came out in 2017, but due to the ongoing litigation, that was never finalized. So it's been several years since we've had a big update to the MS4 permit, and that's what I'm going to discuss today. So really kind of the game changer that got us to where we are with this new draft MS4 permit at the state level was driven by a 2017 rule through the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level, where they issued their new NEPDs, their national MS4 permit. So that went into effect in 2017, and then that gets trickled down to all the states. So I mentioned there's been ongoing litigation both at the federal level and the state level. Based on that litigation, in 2017, the US EPA issued their final phase 2 rule. And that's kind of where we're all trying to get caught up to now in New York State. So one of the big terms that came out of that 2017 federal rule is the maximum extent practicable. So under that, the MEP, MS4s must track information, analyze information, and adjust their stormwater management program. So it's really trying to comply with this new federal 2017 rule that has promulgated the changes to the current draft MS4 permit. So I'm going to go through now and talk about all the changes that are going on with the draft permit. I'll preface this that if you don't like the changes, it's not me. I'm relaying the information in the regulations, and all of this is still subject to change. The draft permit was out for public review and comment. That public review and comment period is closed. The permit was supposed to be issued in April. The effective date of the permit was listed as April 27th of this year. But it still has not yet been released. So one of the big changes has to do with the mapping requirements of the MS4 permit. All of the mapping requirements under the old permit used to be tied into minimum control measure 3, which was that illicit discharge detection and elimination. Under the new proposed permit, they've made mapping its own section. So currently, what are we required to do? As a regulated MS4 under today's permit, you're required to have an outfall map, which is a map that shows all of your discharge locations from your MS4 drainage system. You're required to identify where those outfalls discharged, so to what surface water body they discharge. And you're required to have a preliminary sewer shed boundary. So where you have an outfall, you can see, this mapping under today's regulations could be almost as simple as what you see on the screen here, where you have an outfall location. And then under that outfall location, you would have a boundary that shows all of the area that drains to this outfall. And the real intent of that is, I mentioned that you have to do these outfall inspections. So if your inspector is out and if they're looking at the discharge from the outfall and they see a potential contaminant issue, they could go back to that sewer shed boundary and they would know the area that's draining to that outfall. So it would give them clues as to what areas might be draining to that potential discharge issue. And under the current permit, if grant funds are available, you are required to map out your storm sewer system. So not just the outfall location, but all the pipes and ditches leading to that location. Again, that's not required today. It's only required if the grant funds were available. So where are we going? These are the new proposed mapping requirements. Again, it's a standalone section now of the MS4 permit. The MS4s are required to add a land use component to their mapping. So not just the sewer sheds that drain to the outfalls, but all of the different types of land use, whether it's quarter acre residential, industrial, commercial, agricultural lands. We need to have a layer on the outfall maps that show what types of land uses drain to those discharge points. As I go throughout the presentation, you're going to see a lot of references to EDP. And what that means is the effective date of the permit. So for the mapping requirements, they broke it out into 2 phases. So phase 1, within 3 years of the effective date of the permit, the MS4s are required to prioritize different monitoring locations for their outfalls, look at different focus areas. So focus area could be an area where you have heavy industrial usage, maybe a commercial corridor. The MS4s are also required to map permanent stormwater management practices that they own. So if it's a municipally owned pond, that's required to be put on the mapping. And they're also required to identify their municipal facilities on the outfall maps. So your highway garages, your public works departments, your parks departments, all of those facilities are required to be put on the outfall map. And I'll talk more about those in a little bit. So the second phase, phase 2, 5 years after the permit becomes effective, MS4s are going to be required to do that conveyance mapping. So again, under the old permit, the conveyance mapping was just required if funds were available, but under the new proposed permit, it's going to be mandated. So that's, again, all your ditches, it's all your pipe networks, inlets, catch basins, manholes, a very detailed drainage map of your entire drainage system. And it's not just lines on a map. We have to have descriptions. So you can't just say it's a pipe that drains to an outfall. You have to have a description of the diameter of the pipe. So if it's a 24-inch reinforced concrete pipe, PVC pipe, you have to have a real descriptive features for each of the drainage systems. And also under phase 2, the municipalities are going to be required to add any privately owned stormwater management practices to the mapping.
So
Martin,
David,
was there a question?
Yes, we do. It's pretty specific, so maybe we'll get to this. The question is, what restrictions exist for car washes that discharge into a treatment plant? and then discharge into waterways. I don't think they're talking about a treatment like, and it goes into a sanitary system and then goes and gets treated. I think they're talking about some pre-treatment before it gets discharged. To my knowledge, I don't think car washes are allowed to just discharge to a stormwater outfall. That would be an illicit discharge.
That's correct. Yeah. So typically now new car washes actually have to recirculate all of their water. But car washes, yes, they can't discharge to the MS4 system. And even car washes, you think of the high school football team fundraisers, out in a parking lot. That would be an illicit discharge today. So you really can't have any soap, suds, and the dirt, the oils, and the greases can't be finding their way to the stormwater system. So the guidance there would be to do things where you have a vegetated buffer, so it's infiltrated into the ground. So more on a field, on a grass surface where you're not having any discharge into the drainage system.
Yeah, for a car wash, they would be required to discharge the process water into the sanitary system.
Yes. Yep. Were there more questions up there?
No, that was the only one so far.
Okay. All right. Okay. So going back to the old versus the new, again, the old map would have just shown an outfall location, which you can see hopefully with my cursor here, the triangle with the yellow highlight around it. And then the drainage area that drains to that outfall. But under the new regulations, a lot more mapping is going to be required. Again, all of the conveyances, whether it's pipe, open channel, size of those conveyances, catch basins, manholes, and even privately owned facilities and drainage structures that may not be owned by your MS4. So if you're a local MS4, a town, and if you have a county road or a state road running through your jurisdiction, you'd be required to show those locations as well. Okay, so I'm going to get into minimum control measure 1 and really follow the same format. If any of you saw the DEC's webinar that they put out on the proposed changes, it follows a very similar format where I'm going to go through some of the current requirements and then the proposed new requirements. So minimum control measure 1 is public education and outreach. Under the current program, basically the MS4s are required to educate the public on pollutants, water bodies, and geographic areas of concern. And they're required to identify target audiences to educate the public. So what was always a gray area under the current program is, how often do we do this? We can, create flyers. We can put flyers or pamphlets in water bills and mail them out. We can have pamphlets at, town hall or municipal buildings. But it's difficult to track, and it was difficult to gauge, how often this outreach needed to occur. So under the proposed regulations, within 3 years, the municipalities are required to identify focus areas. And these could be based on the watershed within your municipality. So some watersheds may have different impairments or different pollutants of concern. Some areas may be more prone to construction activities. Some areas may have, streams that are running through them that are prone to erosion. Looking at areas that are on on-site wastewater treatment systems. So if you have a on-site wastewater treatment system, specific outreach would be required. Outreach is required for different residential components, commercial, industrial areas, stormwater hotspots, which could be a gas station or another type of operation that has high potential for stormwater contaminants. And also training is now required on illicit discharges. So the new program, again, requires different training for different audiences. So your training for residents is going to be different for commercial properties. It's going to be different for construction operators. It's going to be different for your municipal employees, but it really requires a much deeper, broader training to be developed. Again, I mentioned specific trainings required for illicit discharges. And now we have a time frame. So education must be conducted to each of these different target audiences at least once per permit term. So we anticipate that it will likely be a 5-year permit. So you have to reach out, have to develop targeted information for each of these different audiences at least once during the permit. So this could just be an example of an illicit discharge training. Whether this was a pamphlet or a brochure, but this just identifies different types of illicit discharges. So on the residential side, you could be focusing more on sanitary sewer discharges. On the commercial side, you might be looking more at floor drain connections or industrial discharges. And then also on the agricultural side, looking at best management practices for agricultural activities. All right, so we're going to jump to minimum control measure 2, public involvement and participation. Currently, there's not a whole lot required under the permit for this. Each municipality is required to have a local point of contact. So someone that the residents can call if they see a drainage issue, an erosion issue, if they see an illicit discharge. Municipalities also have to make their annual reports available for public review and comment, and the same with their stormwater management program plan. So typically the way this has been done is by postings on your municipal website. So, I just would ask everyone, if you are regulated MS4, take a look at your website and see what information's on there. Ideally, it's going to have a link for your stormwater management program plan. It's going to have a link for all of your annual reports, hopefully some public education information, and some opportunities to get additional information as well, perhaps links to DEC websites or EPA websites. So under the new permit, a few changes. There has to be a opportunity once a year to receive public comment on your stormwater management program. The other big change is, as most of you know, we're wrapping up the end of May here, and MS4 reports are due June 1st. I'm not sure if that reporting deadline will change under the new permit, but under the proposed permit, you have to seek public comments by May 1st of each year. So that's really going to tighten the window from the end of the reporting year, which is March 10th of each year. You're going to have to put together a draft annual report, get that posted to your website, make announcements at board meetings or other ways to get that information out to the public, and get any comments back by May 1st. And then you have to include those comments in your final annual report that's submitted to the DEC. And then based on those comments, you're required to update your stormwater management plan. So those first two were pretty easy. We're going to get into a little bit more details as we move on here into minimum control measure 3. Again, this deals with illicit discharges. So I kind of went over this earlier, but basically the only thing that's supposed to be draining down our MS4 stormwater system is stormwater. So rainwater and snow melt. That's all that should be going down the drains. So an illicit discharge could be sewage, again, septic systems, soap suds from cross connections, from laundry, industrial waste, wash water from auto industries, and any sediment laden water. So that's again where the construction impacts get in. So if you have a big plume of sediment, dirty brown water going into a storm drain, that would be considered an illicit discharge. So under the current program, you're required to inspect all of your outfalls at least once every 5 years. So typically you like to try to get a 20% of your outfalls inspected each year. You also have to have a local law, assuming that you have the ability and authority to implement local laws. This isn't required at the county level. So, towns, villages, cities have to have a local law that prevents illicit discharges. So under the new requirements, you're required to map more than just the outfalls. You're required to map any connections to another MS4. You're also required to map all of the discharges from your municipal facilities to your MS4 drainage system. So just to go a little deeper on that, right now under the current permit, you would just have to map the outfall location, the location that at the end of the pipe or the ditch that drains to a surface water. But now under the new program, if you have a municipal facility, if it's a public works facility, and where the drainage off that public works facility, where that enters the rest of the drainage system, not just the outfall, those locations need to be mapped. And then based on those locations, each municipality is required to develop an inventory of monitoring locations. So it could be monitoring more than just the end of pipe. It could be monitoring those connections where your municipal operations drain into the rest of the drainage system. So one of the keys here, you're going to see this a couple times as we move forward, are these priority rankings. So under minimum control measure 3 for the illicit discharges, you're required to rank your outfalls either as a high priority outfall or a low priority outfall. So a high priority outfall receives drainage from a high priority municipal facility, which could be any municipal facility that has petroleum bulk storage, salt storage, does fleet fueling, does maintenance on equipment. That would be considered a high priority municipal facility. So if you have discharge from one of those facilities that go to an outfall, that would turn that into a high priority outfall. Other ways you get into a high priority outfall is if that location discharges to an impaired water, a TMDL water, or high priority water. So basically, if you're going to either an impaired or a very high priority clean water, that would put you in the high priority outfall status. And if there's been 3 or more citizen complaints, so if, again, you have to have a community hotline, you have to have a municipal point of contact. If there's been more than 3 complaints at a certain outfall location, that would automatically elevate that outfall location to a high priority point. So what does that mean? So if you're a high priority outfall, again, under today's permit, you would have to just monitor that once per permit term. But if you're a high priority outfall, those have to be monitored and inspected at least twice per permit term. In the low priority outfalls, they stay where they are today, just once per permit term. There's some other changes. Typically, when you do these outfall inspections by the permit, you're required to do them during the dry weather. So you don't want to be doing the outfall inspections when it's raining. And the purpose for that is if you're out there during dry weather and there's flow coming out of a pipe or a ditch, that could really indicate that there's a potential illicit discharge. It could be a cross connection from a sanitary sewer. It could be a connection from a floor drain. So that's why you're required to do it during dry weather. So if you go to an outfall and there's no flow, but there's indicators of potential contamination at the end of pipe, you're required to re-inspect that within 30 days. So I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the inspection requirements. You'll see that these inspection forms are contained in the draft permit. They're in Appendix D of the draft permit. There's a lot of good information there. But this is the type of detail that you're required to document. So it's not just the outfall location. Again, it's the construction of the pipe, whether it's concrete, steel, cement, HDPE, the characteristics of the drainage swales. If there's flow, coming through the pipe. You need to record that, measure that. And then here's really the key for outfalls that are flowing, is there odor, color, turbidity, floatables? That could indicate an illicit discharge. But under the new permit, I mentioned for non-flowing outfalls, if you have an outfall that's not flowing, but you see damage to it, or you see staining or, high weed growth, you're required to go back to that outfall and do a reinspection within 30 days. And then finally on the outfall form, this is just a summary, whether or not, you saw signs of an illicit discharge, and then this could lead you into actually going to test and do some benchmark testing for the water quality. So take note of this publication on the right-hand side. This is really the guide for doing the illicit discharge detection and elimination. It's a document from the Center for Watershed Protection. Came out a while ago, but this document is actually referenced in the proposed permit, and it really outlines the guidelines and the requirements of how to do the inspections. And then if you do have signs of an illicit discharge, how to go back, how to track it, how to look upstream, and how to sample, what parameters to sample based on what you saw.
Hey, David, we had a question from one of the attendees as far as the effectiveness of winter inspections. Do you find do not disturb. Do you find the communities that you work with are getting good information or usable data if they're conducting winter inspections at some of their outfalls or their facilities for that matter?
Yeah, I would think less so. I mean, typically we do our inspections either early spring or late fall. And the reason for that is the outfalls are just easier to get to, before things grow up. I mean, all these outfalls are drained into a water body, so they all have excessive vegetation. It's much easier to see the discharge. So we haven't done many inspections in the winter. We typically focus in spring and fall.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to shift to control measure 4. Again, this deals with runoff from construction activities. So under today's permit, MS4s must have a local law in place dealing with erosion and sediment control. They must have a process to review stormwater plans. So if a site plan comes into for your planning board review, depending on if that site disturbs over an acre, they're required to have a stormwater pollution prevention plan. So municipalities have to review and sign off on those stormwater plans. There's also requirements for addressing complaints, doing construction site inspections, and that was also another real gray area. So under the proposed permit, the MS4 is supposed to be doing inspections of construction activities, but there was never a real strong indication of how many, the frequency, how often, when should you do these inspections. So that's changed under the new permit. There's also requirements for educating contractors and to have an inventory of construction sites within your community. So under the new program, you have to develop a comprehensive oversight program, which really outlines how you're going to oversee the construction activities within your MS4. You also have to develop a detailed site inventory and inspection tracking mechanism. So again, I mentioned the priorities, so that comes into play again here. So based on the type of construction activity in your municipality, where it's located, is going to dictate how often you have to inspect it. So a high priority construction site is going to discharge again to a threatened water body that's on the New York State DEC's 303D list, or to trout spawning or trout waters. If the construction activity is close to a pond or a stream, you can see the buffer requirements there. That amps the inspection requirements up. If you're disturbing more than an acre of soil on a soil slope phase of D, E, or F, which are basically your steeper slopes, that's going to increase their frequency. And if you are disturbing 1 or more acres with a high erosion risk, that's going to increase the inspection frequency. So here's the requirements for a high priority construction site. the MS4 operator is required to inspect that at least once a month. So every 30 days, someone from the municipality has to go out, has to oversee the construction activities, make sure that the construction are following their stormwater plan, making sure that they're doing their weekly inspections. A lot of times, municipalities require construction site operators and inspectors to send them their reports. So typically these reports are being done once a week. If you're disturbing more than 5 acres, they have to be done twice a week. So if MS4s are relying on others' reports and they're reviewing them, then the frequency for high priority construction inspections goes down to every 90 days. So lower priority construction site inspections, just once a year. That's it. So that's been defined. But for both high and low priority inspections, the MS4s must do a final inspection before the site is closed out, before the notice of termination is submitted to close out the construction permit. So this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but again, really good forms in Appendix D of the draft permit. So these are an example of the inspection forms that an MS4 would be completing for a construction activity within their jurisdiction. So looking just to make sure that the construction operator has a SWIP, making sure that it's been signed, making sure that the SWIP is up to date, all the inspector requirements are in place, making sure that the record keeping is done, again, making sure that the inspections are done at least once a week. And then, looking at visual observations, signs for erosion, making sure your BMPs, whether it's silt fence, other practices, making sure that they're being maintained and properly installed. And then looking at any water quality issues that might be coming off the construction site. There's also some training requirements. So the folks that are doing the MS4 inspections are required to have a 2-hour MS4 inspection training once per permit term. And they're also required to get that 4-hour training from the New York State DEC in erosion and sediment control at least once every 3 years. And there's also a requirement to have a pre-construction meeting. So that's a meeting where you would get the MS4 operator, the owner of the development, the contractor, and whoever's doing the inspections on behalf of the owner to have a meeting before construction starts. So that's a new requirement. All right, minimum control measure 5, post-construction. So this is looking at all of our practices that have been built with the new construction or redevelopment project. So again, your stormwater ponds, wetlands, bioretention areas, rain gardens, porous pavements, any of the practices that were built to address water quantity and quality. So under the current permit, again, local law is required to mandate these things. There's a review process, as I mentioned earlier, for new site plan applicants. They have to have a signed SWIP. The SWIP has to be reviewed by the MS4, and the MS4 is required to just have an inventory of the post-construction practices that they own and operate. So where are we going? Under the new permit, it expands that inventory to not only include publicly owned facilities, but also privately owned facilities. The MS4s are required to develop an inspection and maintenance program, and again, have a detailed plan to do inventories, inspections, and tracking of these post-construction practices. So I'll refer you to the guidance document on the right-hand side of the screen here. This is a DC maintenance manual. So this maintenance manual, it's a really good visual reference. It breaks down many different stormwater practices, not just ponds, wetlands, but all the green infrastructure practices. And it's a guidance for how, when, and where to inspect these practices. So these are just a couple examples out of the manual. This is looking at a pond. So these are the typical areas that you would inspect. the embankments of the pond, the inlets, the outlets, drainage areas, the depth of the pond, how much vegetation's in the pond. This manual also outlines how often you should do the inspections. So if it's once a year, once every 2-3 years, and they're all going to vary depending on the practice. So it's broken out into different levels of inspection. So a level 1 inspection is kind of a general check. This is an example just for the pond inlets. Again, it has a nice visual guide for all the different features of a pond. And then based on how you answer these questions, it might kick you to a level 2 inspection or a level 3 inspection. And these are just much more detailed inspections based on the level 1. All right, so our last minimum control measure, 6, pollution prevention and good housekeeping. Under the current permit, you're required to have a pollution prevention program. You're required every 3 years to do a self-assessment. There's a checklist that you look at your municipal activities to make sure that you have best management practices in place so you don't have pollutants running off your municipal operations. You're also required to train your municipal staff. And under the current permit, if you have a site that is subject to the industrial stormwater permit, which is a whole nother stormwater permit, but if you have a site that's subject to your industrial stormwater permit, you just kind of roll that into your MS4 stormwater management program plan. So some examples of that, some municipalities may own a landfill, they may own an airport. Those operations would just fall under your MS4 program, but that's changed as well.
David, I got a $1 million question for you.
All right.
Do you recommend, or perhaps you have some guidance, that municipalities take over stormwater structures? And what's the typical maintenance cost? So I can think of a dozen examples around the table when communities discuss BMPs or enforcement issues related to stormwater ponds. And that's a constant tug of war over whether you want the stormwater pond as a municipality or whether you want to continue to have that pond owned by the homeowners association. In your view, put you on the hot seat here. What types of relationships work best to ensure maximum compliance for minimum cost?
That's a great question. It could be a presentation in and of itself, but typically it's going to be maintained. You're going to have more control over it if the municipality takes it over. But, with that comes liability and cost. So, a lot of times we'll urge, our MS4 clients just to have real strong maintenance agreements in place, but keep them in private ownership where possible. But to make sure that there's easements in place and there's agreements in place where if a private entity isn't, doing the upkeep, then an MS4 can come in and do that. So it's not a great answer. It depends on, staffing of the MS4s, what their capacities are to take on that extra workload and cost.
If there's a district that can absorb the cost as well.
Yeah, and then you can look at district fees as a great opportunity to do that. We are seeing much more of that, setting up stormwater districts to provide a funding mechanism to do that. Okay,
come right in. Hold on.
Sure.
We'll ask you another while we're in the zone. Question: if your community is not following MS4, you are. It says, what are you? It's like a Jeopardy question. You are unregulated, but there are still some requirements placed upon you for managing construction sites.
Yeah, if you're not an MS4, typically managing the construction sites would fall back to the state. There's still, could be other local laws, ordinances in place that pick up some of these requirements. But if you're not a regulated MS4, oftentimes, the inspections fall back to the state.
Yep.
Okay, so back to pollution prevention, good housekeeping. Again, more plans are required, more inventories are required. And we're going to get back into our high priority, low priority distinctions. So a high priority municipal facility is anyone that has bulk storage of chemicals, your salt storage facilities, petroleum, gas, diesel, pesticides, fertilizers, antifreeze, lead acid batteries, tires. So I mean, just that definition just tunes you into public works facilities, highway garages, anyone that's doing vehicle maintenance. So those are all put into the high priority caption. And this is probably, in my mind, one of the biggest and probably most costly ways to implement the new permit, because for these sites now, these sites are going to be required to have a site-specific stormwater pollution prevention plan. So they're going to have to have a standalone document that identifies all the pollutants that could be running off the site. They're going to have drainage mapping, outfall mapping, and there's new assessment requirements. So for any of these high priority sites, you have to do screening of your outfall locations twice a year, and you have to do a site assessment once per year. So this is just an example of a screening form, again, twice a year for the high priority sites. This is where you actually go out, you collect a beaker of water coming off that site, and you screen it for potential contaminants. The assessment forms, these are required once a year for the high priority facilities. Again, making sure that they have a facility specific stormwater plan. And then just big checklists, looking at their good housekeeping practices, their vehicle and equipment maintenance areas, fuel areas, salt storage areas, fluids managements, batteries managements, spill prevention control, your material storage areas, stormwater management areas. So you can see it's a pretty hefty checklist. We're down to line 74 here on it. And it continues to go here, looking at potential discharges from the site, erosion and sediment control. So this will have to be done once a year at those high priority facilities. Low priority facilities, once a permit term. So typically once every 5 years, you'd have to do that assessment. And there's no visual monitoring. Again, the high priority ones, you have to look at the discharges twice a year. Also under the pollution prevention, good housekeeping, there's new requirements for catch basin inspections. They all have to be inventoried and inspected. New requirements for street sweeping. So once a year is now mandated, twice a year if you're in a commercial or business district. All right, I know we're getting to the top of the hour here, so just going to wrap up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the take home message here is if you discharge to a TMDL, which is a total maximum daily load watershed, or an impaired water body, the requirements for everything I just talked about, those 6 minimum control measures, they all go up. So this is the mapping for the Capital District. So again, purple are your MS4 areas. Fortunately, you don't have any TMDLs in the Capital District. There's no watershed improvement strategies in the Capital District, but there are some 303D water bodies. So if you're a municipality that discharges to one of these, and here you are, there's going to be heightened requirements. So again, just going back to this, think about what this whole program is meant to do. This whole program is meant to try to clean up our waters. So if there's anything you take away from today, do everything we've talked about, do your best management practices, your training, and stay off this map. You don't want to have impaired water bodies. You don't want to have TMDLs within your municipality. So within the Capital District, extended it a bit, but those are just the current list of impaired waters. So again, if you're a municipality that discharges to one of these, you're going to have some increased requirements. So there's a lot more information. I highly urge you, if you're regulated MS4, to check out the DEC's website. The draft permits on there. It's a really good fact sheet on there. They did a webinar that they recorded and put on there. So a lot of good information is there. I know everyone's going to ask, when's this thing coming? Again, the effective date was April 27th. We're past that. I'm expecting that once we get past the June 1st MS4 reporting deadline, we might be looking to see a final permit, but I've learned I'm not going to commit any timing to it. Last thing I'm going to end with here is this website link. It's just another link off the DEC's website, but they have a great repository of compliance forms. So this is just a snippet of one of them. And this thing goes on for pages and pages, but it really breaks down the entire draft permit by each of the minimum control measures, and it gives you time frames of when you must be in compliance. So once we get to the final permit, please, check out this website and work towards meeting those goals. So I'm going to breathe.
Hi, Nadine. How are you?
There's Nadine's back.
No, I appreciate the sharing of resources. I will do a plug if your community is lucky enough to have a formalized stormwater coalition that can take on some of the inspection, the reporting, the education requirements. They are really valuable resources in order to capitalize on some of those things you can do together. For example, a lot of the communities we work with in Albany County, when they talk about educational materials, they point to the Stormwater Coalition, which has developed a number of materials. And I know that these coalitions exist throughout the state, including in Western New York. David, you're from the Rochester area, correct?
Yeah. Central New York, Western New York has a great one. Rochester, Syracuse, Albany. That's a great point. A lot of this stuff you don't need to recreate. You can share it. Even could be opportunities to share some of the if there's street sweepers, if you can get shared services agreements in place to kind of spread this around, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, and it's definitely shown in the capital region. Communities that are inside these coalitions are much more prepared. We didn't even get into it when it comes time for DEC and EPA audits of your stormwater programs. There are stipulated penalties for not following the guidance in the permit and not following your stormwater management plans. So we do remind communities that these are important programs. They're permanent programs, and you want to make sure you maintain compliance because there are costs and administrative requirements if you're not following them. So, David, I really want to thank you for your time. Appreciate you flying solo for us for the entire hour. Get a drink of water, take a break, take a walk. I do want to say a big thanks to you and to Barton and Judas for continuing to support the webinar series. We could not do it without our sponsors, and especially as speakers. We would have no show and no commercials. So we'd have nothing. We'd just be dead air. So I really do appreciate the time you shared with us, and I love that you featured Inspector Gadget on one of your slides.
I'm glad someone knew that.
Yeah, don't ask me for my Dr. Claw impression. I'll spare everyone.
I appreciate the opportunity, and definitely if there's any follow-up questions, my email is up there. Feel free to reach out to me or Nadine, and we can definitely assist.
Absolutely. So we'll resume next Wednesday. We are going to be talking about your community and the triple bottom line: insurance resiliency through neighborhood, financial, and environmental health planning. We will be featuring guests from the MRB group talking about ways that communities can not only work to improve environmental resiliency, but financial resiliency as well within their communities. So I'm looking forward to that one. That will be Wednesday at 1. This webinar you can find archived on the Eventbrite page. We'll have a link to our YouTube video, and the materials that are contained within will also be making available. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We're wrapping up just as the clouds come over. Yay. So back to the grind. And David, thank you again.